You're tuned into RX Radio. Movement prescribed. Brought to you by Prescript.com. A personalized approach to keeping you healthy and making your best even better. Your hosts, Dr. Jordan Shallow and Dr. Jordan Ginta.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of RX Radio. Really interesting one for you guys this week. I know we always check the numbers. We take a look, see what you guys like to listen to or see what you guys like to share with your friends. And without a doubt, nutrition seems to be something that draws a lot of people's attentions when it comes to podcasts. And I think rightfully so. And I think a large in part is because nutrition is something that's so just something that's missing context so often, right? We see these debates and a lot of people don't speak about nutrition from first principles. So we've actually had this guest on the show before. Good friend of mine, his name is Tony Montgomery. I met Tony, I met Tony at the US Open. We competed against each other. I warmed up for Tony while he beat the shit out of everyone. Back in 2018, maybe 2017. And since then, we've stayed in touch, and he's had a very interesting journey in the world of strength sports, but also in the world of academia. Tony is now studying in Tampa, Florida. He's studying his PhD, and I thought, who better? We've had him on the show before, and you could literally go full spectrum on this guy as far as subject matter. Yeah, he can talk anything from religion to philosophy to, as we find out today, he has another superpower, and that's talking about nutrition. So Tony does a bunch of things, and he does them really well, which is super frustrating. I've coined the term that he is the Elon Musk of fitness. He just does so many things and just casually brings them up not casually brings them up in conversation, but just is very unassuming in what he does and to the degree in which he does them. So really glad that Tony was able to take the time to hang out while we were in Tampa. Excuse me, Killian, myself, and Tony Montgomery. I don't even know where to start. Strength Union, if you're in the Pacific Northwest, is Tony's gym. He's obviously running that sort of remotely while he's off in Florida. Team Phoenix Performance is where he coaches his clients and athletes. He does obviously a lot in the nutrition, but knows his way around a barbell. I would argue better than anyone. So he does program for a lot of strength athletes as well. He has Subject Zero supplements, which, as you'll tell based off of the conversation today, is something that I think you guys should definitely look into. And this is coming from someone with very, I think, a breadth of experience in the supplement world when it comes to the fitness industry, and just looking at some of the stuff that Tony's put together with Subject Zero. Tony also hosts a podcast. He's hosts a podcast with Trevor Jaffe, Coach's Corner. I've been lucky enough to have appeared on that. I think it was they must have just been testing out the audio equipment when they had me on. But Tony does a lot of things. He does them really well. So I would definitely keep an eye on Tony on social. All that stuff's going to be on the show notes. Super grateful to have this guy in our corner. It's always interesting to see what he gets up to. I think if there's something to be learned, it's more so how Tony operates. With how he trains, how he studies, how he approaches business and relationships and things like that. One of the more impressive people you'll ever want to come across in your entire life. By the way, he's also a military veteran, served overseas. So let's just throw that in there. If you're not feeling inadequate enough, Tony is a very special person. Someone that whenever I do get to spend some time with him, I jump at the opportunity, and I'm pretty lucky that I get to share this stuff with you guys. So Tony, huge thanks, man. Guys, do check out Tony Montgomery. Check out the podcast. Check out Subject Zero. Check out Team Phoenix Performance. Check out Strength strength union if you are in the Pacific Northwest, or if you're traveling through, do drop them a line. But that's it for me, guys. Oh, one last thing before we get started. Prescript weightlifting is now live. 5-week course put together by the one and only Jordan Junta on all things snatch, clean, and jerk, progression, regression, adaptations, optimizations. Real unique course. This one is a do at your own pace. So the inaugural class will sit December 16th. Registration is now live at www.pre-script.com. This is going to be the most in-depth repository of Olympic weightlifting instruction that I've ever come across. It also comes with weekly lab sections, so interactive labs where we go on. Jordan kind of spearheads this, and we go through, analyze technique, go through questions based off of the material of the week. And so everyone sort of gets together who's currently enrolled in the course and can ask questions, all things related to Olympic weightlifting, so we can gain as much context around it as possible. Guys, really excited for this. I think the production value, the thought process, the follow-up labs, I think I would argue it's our best course to date, although I don't want to speak too soon, as Killian Hamilton's skill acquisition course is also live. So if you guys are interested in any of the courses, head over to www.pre-script.com. Check them out while you're cruising the internet. Make sure you stop off at Tony's several corners of the internet and say hi. That's it for me. I hope you guys enjoy the episode, and we'll see you next week.
It's a weird place to express yourself because everyone has an opinion and they all think it's an expert opinion.
Yeah, the social following as a means of like trust is a weird thing, because it makes it a currency, right?
Yeah.
But in saying that, social media platforms are now a form of government because they dictate the value of the currency in a similar way, and they also can censor and punish people.
They dictate a lot, yeah. I watched that movie, Social Dilemma.
Never watched it.
No, it's good.
Is it?
Yeah, it makes you really understand the control that social media has and the impact they can have on certain things. Like one of the stories they were telling was the social impact it had on this political race in some small country, and how the one group posted everything on Facebook, ads and everything, and it was pretty much like a 99% vote for them because they used Facebook as that outlet. So obviously Facebook get ad revenue from that, so they just kept pumping their stuff, and it's like, you know,
Better than lawn signs and bumper stickers.
Yeah.
Or maybe Bernie should have hopped on board. Maybe Bernie should have had a paid spend budget.
Should have done something.
Oh man, that guy! Don't get me started about that guy.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those cases where you're the hero long enough until you become the villain. Like you almost became like the Two-Face of the party, where it's like, dude, you just keep letting people pimp slap you down, like that last minute switcheroo to get Biden the head, like the go ahead.
Yeah.
Like, dude, like run as an independent. Right? Well, it's funny because he gains so much, and it's funny, like kind of started the conversation about the pull of social media and like the responsibility of some of these institutions as almost government organizations. Like, you know, he went on like a podcast like Rogan, and the amount of awareness you're going to get on that podcast is insane, right? Like he could run as an independent. Rogan could have him on 3 or 4 times during an election cycle, and that could attain a critical mass that make you a viable competitor, right? But then at the same time, and this is something that like I've struggled with, and I don't know anything about it, but I don't want this to be like a Joe Rogan thing, but like he will bring on guests and that are maybe biased in his selection, and especially around the nutritional field. Like he just had that Paul Saladino, and talking about like carnivore and stuff like that, and the misinformation. Like I see it with like, you know, when Robert Obears went on and started talking about deadlifting, it's like, oh great, I'm glad to see we have 0 experts at the table. Like we have a 50-year-old cage fighting commentator and a guy who's just insanely strong, like some mountain man. It's like, but that level of influence, and we got like thoughts on this. It's like, for fuck's sake.
Yeah.
But on the nutrition side, like the level of contention around the nutritional space and the clouding of like, good information, it especially on that show in particular, because there does seem to be a predetermined bias towards the guests he has on and the topics.
Right.
Like I think Mike Baker was on. He's a carnivore guy. Paul Saladino was on. He was a carnivore.
He did have a debate between like Gary Tobbs and Alan Aragon, I think, or somebody else, where it was carbohydrates versus, no carbohydrates. And he had Lane Norton on, I believe, as well. So, I mean, he did. When he has the debates, it's a little bit more differentiated. But
would you even call those debates?
Well, no, not really. I just, it's like two people who have their thoughts that aren't willing to have an open mind and lack creativity in their ability to process information. So it's just, I'm going to prove you wrong, and then I'm going to prove you wrong. And I don't know if that what I would consider like a successful debate. It's just two people trying to squawk over each other to push their information out.
Right. Well, because that's what you say, like the purpose of a system is what it does.
Yeah, not what it says it does, right?
Right.
Like you can say anything does anything, but at the end of the day, its purpose is whatever the hell it actually does.
And I feel like the purpose of that platform is now just becoming getting your name out there.
Yeah.
Not helping people.
Right.
Because it's part of like training that I don't have like a really good grasp on, and it's something that ever since we've met, I've always been super impressed with you, like, you know, coming from a powerlifting background, with strongman background, military background, you know, PhD background, like just like the most interesting man in the world. But like you would do these things that I never saw another powerlifter do, and you would go through like these strategic like mini cuts, like 6, 8, 10 weeks, and all of a sudden it's just like, holy shit. Like Tony shredded, like out of just like nowhere. It's like one day I think one of your transformations was like beard with hair, bigger Tony to like Benjamin Button, bald, shredded Tony. I was like, I had to look at the tattoos. I'm like, okay, this is the same person.
Guy,
yeah. But like, what's your? I mean, I won't even say your take, but like, how do you contextualize some of the arguments that go on between like the carnivore, keto, paleo, anti-carb movement, and, you know, maybe the carb performance, body composition, insulin crowd? Like, where would you start in guiding someone around contextualizing this conversation?
Yeah, so I mean, if it's just strictly about weight loss and trying to obtain as much muscle as possible, then you just have to ask yourself, well, what's the mechanism that's going to allow me to break down fat and retain muscle, right? And then you can continue to break that down by looking at, well, what is the mechanisms that break down fat? You have lipolysis, then you have beta oxidation. Fat lipolysis is when you take a triglyceride and you break it down into 3 fatty acids and a glycerol product, and then from there you have to oxidize that, and that creates the energy, and that creates the actual breakdown of fat. So then it's like, well, what mechanisms allow you to do that successfully? And it's like, well, a calorie deficit for one, and then exercise for the other. And the calorie deficit could be from almost any train of thought. It really just depends on what you can adhere to, right? The literature will show that all diets work for the most part. They've compared Atkins and all these other diets within this one research review, and they saw that all of them had success if they were in a calorie deficit. So they had moderate carbohydrates, Atkins, which is very low carb, and then they had some other named diets, which is like, well, if your diet has a name to it, then it's probably illegitimate to begin with, because diet is just a breakdown of macronutrients, and that's what it should be. You need all 3 of them to kind of perform well and live well. Protein is obviously the most important one, and that's going to be your building blocks, your amino acids and stuff like that, and that's going to help you put on as much muscle and recover from training. And then you have fats, which are going to be your hormones, and that's going to allow you to, you know, have your hormones work as successfully as they can within the body, and you only need X amount of those, right? And then once you hit that threshold, then it's like, well, what do I want to fill the rest of my calories with? And it's like, well, carbohydrates are your most readily available source of energy. So why not just add those in there if you're someone that's a performance athlete that's looking for that? You know, the idea that carnivore is going to be a more successful diet is like, well, maybe, right? If you have these issues with certain foods and you have these issues with certain inflammatory responses to those foods, if you eliminate them, then you may clean up your ability to process food. You may clean up your gut microbiome and things of that nature. So a lot of people that have inflammatory issues with carbohydrates, you eliminate those, and then all of a sudden they start losing weight because their gut's starting to work. So if you just fix their gut to begin with any type of elimination diet, whether it be a carnivore or something else, you're going to find success. So I don't necessarily think that the particular diet breeds success, more so than if the diet fits that person's circumstances, then they're going to be successful on that diet because they're going to see results, they're going to feel better, and then they're going to adhere to it a lot more.
Well, I'm always concerned with like the diet identity, right? Which is like the strange thing that comes with the name diet. But stemming from that, I kind of have 2 major questions I want to touch on. The difference between fat loss and weight loss. I feel like when we have these conversations, we have these debates, I feel like one side is talking about weight loss and one side might be talking about fat loss. What's your differentiator as far as thought process goes between those 2 things?
Well, you should only only be thinking about fat loss. Why would you want to lose muscle, right? You work so hard to put on muscle.
Right.
Why would you want to lose that? As soon as, I mean, as you age.
But think about like maybe a more general population application where there's not much muscle to lose.
Right.
Right.
So even as you age, your metabolic rate starts to go down. It declines, I think, like 100 to 200 calories every 10 years. Well, the more muscle you have, the more food you eat, the more that metabolic rate is going to be, it's going to continue to grow. It doesn't grow that much per muscle, but the more muscle you have, typically, the more it's going to grow. The more muscle you have also will allow you to, because as you get older, your muscles degrade. So you have this continuous fight with muscle degradation as you age. So if you can build all that up, especially for women, they're going to build up their bones, they're going to build up their muscle. So then when they get to that age of 30 to 40, when it starts to, your body starts to work against you and you're not willing to look at hormone replacement therapy, then it's like, well, I wish I would have had more muscle to begin with. And then if you focus on just purely weight loss and you lose a bunch of muscle along with fat, keep in mind, right, like fat is just a cell, right? You have this adipocyte cells. They're either going to expand or they're going to shrink, but they never go away unless you remove them through liposuction or freeze them off or whatever the latest surgery is, right?
Lasers.
Yes. But protein, that does degrade, right? You have protein breakdown. So if you're only focused on weight loss and you start to lose your ability to have as much muscle as you used to have, and then your fat cells shrink, well, then as soon as you gain weight again, you don't have that muscle, but you have that fat cell that just shrunk. So then it's going to grow and grow and grow, and it's a more receptive to growing as you reverse out of a diet. You're more likely to put on more fat from survival mechanisms than you are to put on muscle.
What becomes the distinguishing factor, and this is kind of the other side of the coin or the other point I wanted to dive into, as far as like insulin and insulin sensitivity? Because like when I see these debates come around to like paleo, keto, carnivore, low carb, no carb, slow carb, it's like all these diet identities. Right. Shout out Tim Ferriss. I want to look like the guy that has fake Lyme disease. What the fuck are people thinking? But if we look at like these type of like diets, one of the arguments that is always made is about this idea of insulin sensitivity. That if we kind of go like isocalor or like a sort of a cross-sectional diet where we kind of have carbohydrates, we could have carbohydrates with every meal as long as we're in a calorie deficit. I feel like the argument always lends itself towards the idea that it's like, okay, if we're constantly stimulating insulin with carbs, which is kind of silly because we can stimulate insulin with a fucking steak,
right.
But like that always seems to be their default, their ace in the whole argument. Like unpack insulin sensitivity, carbohydrate intake, and like how and when does that even become part of the equation?
Yeah, so with insulin, it's more or less as you become insulin resistant is when the problems start to occur. And that usually occurs not so much because of the diet you're eating, but because how much fat you have and how much weight you are. So typically overweight people are going to be the ones that are going to have the insulin resistance. So what the research shows is that as long as you start to lose weight, you become more insulin sensitive. You can do that with a high carbohydrate diet. You can do it with a low carbohydrate diet. Now, if you're one of those people that have insulin resistance, it may be better to start them off with a lower carbohydrate diet to get it moving in the right direction a little bit faster. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you always have to identify yourself as a low carbohydrate person to keep your insulin where you want it to be. So the issue with insulin resistance, and as insulin becomes more prevalent within the body and your body doesn't produce it as much as it used to, then you have a bunch of cascading effects, right? So if insulin's released, right, and you're trying to lose weight, insulin runs into, during the fat lipolysis process, runs into cyclic AMP, which is one of the processes that fat lipolysis has to go through for it to get broken down. So if it's attaching to cyclic AMP, then your fatty acids aren't attaching to it. So then it's inhibiting that process to break down those fat tissues to become oxidized over time. And also remember, insulin is a shuttling mechanism. So it's going to shuttle fat into fat cells, and it's going to shuttle carbohydrates into carbs, and then protein into protein. So carbohydrates going to go into glycogen. So the idea is if the insulin resistance is high, then it's not working as good as it should be. So then you have this constant influx of insulin in your body that's breaking down your ability to break down those fat cells. If you can't break down the fat cells, then you can't oxidize them, then you can't lose them, right? So that's where the idea of insulin resistance comes in. And insulin resistance also works with coronary heart disease. It also works with issues with vasoconstriction and stuff like that. So it's one of those things that's a very negative connotation to have, and it's something that you should fix immediately, but also thinking about what can cause insulin resistance. And it's like, well, just lack of exercise, calorie surpluses. I know bodybuilders that, are like 12% body fat, but just because they're in a calorie surplus, they become insulin resistant. And then you also have stress, right? High stress people, cortisol is going to break down glycogen within your system, and that's going to spike your blood glucose as well. So if someone has shitty sleep, they'll usually wake up with high blood glucose the next day because their body is breaking down glucose while you're asleep, and that's going to spike that. So then that's going to have a cascading effect as well. So one of the biggest contributors to a lot of this stuff is not necessarily the diet, but it's like a stress component. But you tell people that, and it's more of a functional medicine thing and not an evidence-based thing, then people start to freak out because it's like, well, calories in versus calories out, that's the only way to lose weight. It's like, well, I've seen it where it's not the only way to lose weight. Taking in hormones and cortisol and things like that can have a cascade effect on your ability to lose weight because you do become insulin resistant, because you do have these other issues that aren't just diet related.
Well, and you see this on both sides of the coin, right? Like people trying to, like a Gen Pop person trying to lose weight and they're on 1,100 calories and their body's holding on everything like to your life, right? And I think like the macro counting craze, like it started off with IIFYM, and then it sort of that term doesn't really get tossed around anymore. Now it's just sort of like MyFitnessPal and macros and this stuff. But now all of a sudden that's carrying with it, like that's really just being pigeonholed by if it fits your macros, essentially just turning into calorie deficit, and all your diets work as long as you're in a calorie deficit. But it's like, if you don't take into consideration like the neurological and or the neuroendocrine factors, like I really don't think that's the case. Because I've seen people like my parents. I grew up eating fucking Cheetos, man. My parents didn't know the difference. I remember the first time I decided to not drink Pepsi with dinner. I wanted to drink water. It was like a deal. Like, get a load of this fucking kid. Whose family did you think you come, big fancy water drinking motherfucker? Like, drink a Pepsi like the rest of your family. I felt like Matilda. I felt like Matilda reading a book. I'm just like, God, Jesus Christ, Mike, give me a break, will you? But it's like, my parents now older and more conscious. My sister's a real doctor, and I yell on the internet with this fucking asshole. And it's just like, but like, they are more conscious of their health, and I've seen them attempt to go into a calorie deficit and not lose any weight. Like, don't tell me there's energy in, energy out. I feel like that's such a low rent argument.
Right. I mean, even if you look at it from female's perspective, right, you have this thing called progesterone still, where your body, you have cholesterol, and then that gets broken down into hormones. And then if you have a high level of cortisol, that's going to start stealing from your ability to produce progesterone and testosterone and all these other things. So then you're going to become an estrogen dominant person. And once your progesterone's down and your testosterone's down, then that's going to affect your thyroid, and then that's going to also affect your ability to process glucose. So then how are you going to ever lose weight when all those things are down and your estrogen is high? And the same thing with men that are overly stimulated through high stressful lives. Their adrenals start to shut down. They have adrenal fatigue, which is not something that is necessarily supported by like the medical community. They'll say there's adrenal something, but they won't ever call it like adrenal fatigue. But it's the same thing. If your adrenal glands start to shut down, then your testosterone goes in the tank. Good luck ever trying to lose any type of weight until you get your hormones balanced, until you get those lifestyle factors balanced. Typically with women, they're like spin class 5 days a week, training 4 days a week, high stress, type A personalities. They're going to have high cortisol. They're going to be probably lifelong dieters too. And all those factors are going to contribute to them probably having the hardest time ever losing weight, probably having, amenorrhea and all those other issues that come along with being estrogen dominant and having high levels of cortisol. So it's like, well, fix those factors first. How do you fix someone's stress levels? How do you get them to be living a less stressful life? And I think if you can factor that into a lot of people's diet, then you're going to start seeing a lot more success, right? Because it's like, well, if you can control someone's anxiety, control someone's stress, then you can typically get the ball moving in the right direction. And based on the literature, you would think like, they have this diet break studies that are coming out. The Matador study is one of them, and then Bill Campbell at USF also did one. And it's like, well, when people did these diet breaks where they were able to raise their calories back up to maintenance, and they usually did this on like a vacation or something else, all of a sudden they started to lose weight. It's like, oh, I wonder why, right? Because they're no longer stressed out. They went on vacation, they're eating back at maintenance. They're not trying to overly stress their body. So then all of a sudden their body's like, oh, well, we can start allowing these fat to break down, allowing this weight loss process to occur because you're relaxing and you're controlling your stress. And just focusing on those type of things is like the biggest block to turn over when you're trying to lose a little bit of weight or lose a little bit of fat.
How do you proceduralize this for someone? Right? Because it's so like there's so much research, there's so much on fucking Instagram, like there's so much just in every corner. Like I feel like, and that's the nice thing about the training world. Like we all, the three of us have like, I think, an extensive training background, like relative to what we call industry standard. But like you definitely, when it comes to nutrition, it's like we spent fucking $130 at gas stations eating food the last couple of days.
I don't have a dog in this fight, man.
Like you're talking to a guy, he's probably got like 3 Red Bulls on him right now.
Yeah.
He's got one like strapped to his ankle. It's like his fucking horn. He's like a crackhead. But it's like when it comes to nutrition, and the hard part about, with the inundation of social media is like how like most people just want to know where to start.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so how would you proceduralize this process for someone? Because so much of it is, the subjective interpretation of stress. How do we objectively quantify some of these things? Like, how do we start to put someone on the path where they can be like an autonomous pursuit long term?
Yeah, definitely. So what I do with my clients is I'll have them fill out a stress questionnaire along with their basic questionnaire so I can kind of see where their stress levels are at. And if they hit a certain score within that stress questionnaire, it's like, okay, well, let's get some blood work to see if the blood work will start to elaborate more on the stress score. So blood work is going to be the biggest driver for people that are having issues with any type of dieting and not being able to like get the marker moving in the right direction. So that should be first and foremost. And I always recommend like Life Extensions. They have a weight loss panel that has T3, reverse T3, T4, all your thyroid stuff, all your testosterone stuff, cortisol and everything else. And those are kind of like the biggest drivers that'll get the ball moving in the right direction. And then it's just also looking at some of the lifestyle stuff, right? So if the person, is going to bed at 1 a.m. and they're getting up at, 7 a.m., well, they're not getting the greatest sleep. Their circadian rhythm's kind of thrown off. So then it's just continuing to fix those lifestyle things. And then from there, it's like, well, now we can start looking at your calories, right? And then we can figure out where your calories are at. Are you maintaining weight with it? Or are you not? Have you been a lifelong dieter? If you've been a lifelong dieter, it's probably a good idea to start increasing your calories, and so those would be the key directions I would go, is like lifestyle factors first, blood work on top of that, and then get your baseline calories, like track for 7 days, see where your maintenance is at, and then that would be your starting point that you can start to roll with diet until you get the blood work back and you start fixing the lifestyle stuff.
So like you mirror the subjective interpretation of your stress with the objective coping mechanisms of your stress physiologically.
Yeah.
Do you ever find because you brought up a really interesting point way back in the day. Still want to like if all of this goes if we all die tomorrow, I think one of the coolest things you've ever said, and you brought it up in one of the Good Life seminars, was we could talk about stress and interpretation of stress, and you're a really good person to talk about this just because of your military background.
Yeah. Horrible,
right?
Oh, it's like stress. It's like it's perceived stress, right? It's like, is your stress what you signed up for? Or is it something that you weren't aware of? Like, if I were to go be, if I were to be a doctor in the ER, and I was stressed out by seeing people with gunshot wounds, it's like you have a lot more choices to evaluate, right? Where it's like, where if I signed up to be a gas station clerk and someone pulls a gun on me, although that might be assumed around here, that's probably not what I signed up for. So that's an elevated level of stress to my job, right? So it's almost having that conversation of pain versus discomfort with a client on the leg extension. Like when I used to work in a commercial gym, the first thing I did was put everybody on the leg extension, and we'd just go until they said, ow, it hurts. And I would go, does it hurt or is it uncomfortable?
Right.
And they'd go, well, it's uncomfortable. I'm like, all right, if you ever say it hurts, we're going to stop. You have to learn pain versus discomfort. And you kind of have to learn stress versus unexpected stress. It's like, I'm going to work on Wall Street. Days are going to suck. I signed up for this. And it's like, I need to evaluate that right away, right? If I feel I'm at the ceiling of my stress level, I need to sit back and go, is this the job?
Yeah.
Or is this an aberrance, right? Is this a commonality or an aberrance in what I'm seeing? And then going from there, because a lot of times you have these people that are in stressful positions, but maybe it's things they didn't sign up for. So it's like, well, now that we know that aberrance is going to exist, it's like, we have to control for the controls, like what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you're going to be an ER nurse or doctor, that's gonna happen. So don't add on to it by eating Rice Krispies from the gas station.
Hacking darts in the parking lot. Well, dude, it's always fucking nurses.
Yeah.
I remember being in nightclubs working as a bouncer, and every time someone just got dummied just laying on the dance floor, it was always like a third-year nursing girl that would just run in, like stilettos on, just like 4 bottles deep. Like, I got it. It's like, let me guess, third-year nursing? Just like, it's fine. It's like, Jesus, someone get it out. But it's always nurses that are like, you have no idea how stressful my job is. Like, yes, I do. That's why I don't fucking do it.
Yeah.
Right. Do you think you had summers off and you work till 5 like you're a fucking preschool teacher? Get out of here with this nonsense.
And that's where you usually see like this slippery slope of all other controls being left to the side, right? It's like you took a job where you know the hours are going to be crazy. To not control that even more, you don't prep your food. To not control that even more, you go to downtown Windsor on the weekend and party. It's like, well, maybe don't do that every weekend. It's like you also, I don't know, take the bus to work and you work at a hospital in a different city.
Yeah.
It's like, well, don't do that. Find somewhere local to work, right? Like go to sleep, all those things. And it's like, if you're going to work a job where you don't know what's going to happen the next day, like control what you can control so the variables don't fucking ruin you.
Right.
Like that's what I do.
Yeah, and everyone comes to me like, oh man, like traveling gets stressful. And I flew to Miami. I rented the same car I owned back in Toronto.
Right.
Variable controlled. Yeah. And like the amount of times I've been called autistic this week is out of control for someone who I don't think clinically has it, but it's like, that's what I'm trying to do. And that's what I explained to people. Like we were on a podcast last week and I was like, look, for 3 years, I haven't known where the fucking light switch is in the bathroom. I even had it last night and I talked about it for the first time last week and I just laughed because I went to go take a piss and I just had to clean up the floor in the morning because I was just like, you walk in, I'm like, it needs to be here. And if it's not here, the light's not going on and this is happening, I'm pissing in the shower. Like this is how this story ends. But I talk on the internet. You were in the military.
Right.
But you know what you were signing up for to a certain degree. But at a certain point, like, how do you manage this? Like, how do you coax out of people the stress versus the perception or the discomfort versus the pain?
Yeah, so I think perception of stress is really important too. How you perceive the stress that's being presented, how you perceive your life, perceive a diet. All those things are extremely important, right? If you think of a diet as something that you're going to struggle with, something that you're going to hate, I've dieted before and I've never had success, that perception is going to create more stress once you start to do it. From an athletic perspective, I have a lot of people that are like, well, as soon as I start to diet, I'm going to lose strength. And I've had a female client that I use as an example all the time. We were dieting down and after a deload, the next training session, she would always kind of feel weak. And then we would always have this talk like, oh, is it your diet or is it the actual deload that's affecting your ability to perform after it? And it's like, well, I feel good. My other training sessions is just this one I'm having issues with. Well, I'm like, well, that's your training program that's causing this issue. She wouldn't buy it because her coach that was doing her training was like, it's your diet. So the next time it came around, she's like, oh, it's my diet. She was at like 2,000 calories and was like, she's in a good spot, losing weight, everything was working great. And I was like, all right, fine. We'll start to go into surplus. I just raised her calories like 200. You wouldn't even notice that on any day of the week. And she's like, oh, I feel so much better, hitting PRs and everything. I'm like, no, you're not. Like, it's just your perception of it. And there was actually a study done on housemaids where a lot of the housemates hated their job. They didn't enjoy their job. They found it as a nuisance to their daily life. And then they had someone come in and explain to them, oh, well, you're getting a lot of health benefits. You're making people's lives a little bit better. They pitched them this 20, 30-minute idea of like, your job is meaningful, your life's meaningful. And then all of a sudden, they started to enjoy their job. They started to lose a little bit of weight because they didn't have this negative perception, right? So I think a lot of that is going to be how you are able to combat a lot of the stress that you're going to bring upon yourself. And then there's also dealing with a couple clients now who have anxiety issues when it comes to performance, right? Like they don't do well on meet week. They create a lot of stress for themselves. So then it's, well, how can you have some like hands-on practical things to improve stress? And it's like, well, if you think about it in terms of from a psychological perspective, right? Inoculation, right? Fear inoculation is going to allow you to become less fearful of certain things. Well, it's like, well, stress inoculation. If you can put yourself under stressful events and then control the parasympathetic tone afterwards, then that's going to set you up for more success when it comes to a meet. So I have somebody doing like the fire breath method that Wim Hof talks about, where you're trying to create sympathetic arousal by this breathing pattern. And then after you do that, then you're trying to calm down as fast as possible. You can also do that with ice baths, right? Ice baths have a very negative connotation to them because everyone seems to think that they're a recovery modality, and the research will show clearly it's not. But from a stress inoculation perspective, it can be very useful, right? You're participating in your own ability to create stress, and then once you're in that cold water, you're trying to control that as much as you can. That's going to lend itself to controlling your anxiety too, and controlling all those other things. Then you have a thing called a psychological sigh, right, that you'll see animals do all the time. It's like,
I feel like I do that all day.
Right?
Like every time we talk to each other, it's just like, I feel like it was Ben earlier today just talking to us, just like, oh, for fuck's sake.
That's like
Right?
me in the car. I don't know
Yeah.
how many times I sigh. I'm just like,
Client checks in.
oh, yeah, it's not a sigh.
Well, it's funny because I love the word inoculation
Yeah.
because I feel like inoculation and adaptation are conflated so often, and they're two different things. Like I can tell, like if something drops in, like I don't know, like one of my grocery bags, like something, a can rolls out and falls on the floor. If I jump 10 feet in the air that night, I'm in a cold shower.
yeah.
Because I'm not inoculated. Like I am so sympathetically driven. I'm so like wound up tight, and I never notice it until like car backfires and I fucking like duck under the windows again. It's like, Jesus Christ! I'm like,
Right.
I'm on the 5th floor of a building. Like, what am I doing? And it's like, okay, I need that inoculation. Like inoculation versus adaptation is just, it's like a brief exposure that just gets your body used to it. Like I would look at this NFL season, and I would be like, you did not inoculate properly going into the season.
Right.
Right. It's like, look, man, you're gonna have a really quick ramp up period. You better start to inoculate. You don't have to adapt, but fuck it, if you better start running. You better start running because you're gonna be running. Like fuck it, but you're not gonna get faster. You're just gonna be inoculated.
Yeah,
like I love that
exposures,
word.
yeah, for sure. And then, like I said, just giving people the idea of like they can control their stress as well is something that's really powerful, right? And like I said, the psychological sigh or the physiological sigh connects with the pheneric nerve, which connects to your diaphragm, which can help control all those aspects of breathing, which is going to help put you in a parasympathetic state. So anytime you're stressed out, if you do that sigh, you're going to start to lower your parasympathetic or increase your parasympathetic tone, lower your sympathetic tone. And then it's also getting people into that circadian rhythm that's going to allow them to function on a daily basis with the sun going up and then going down. So the idea is like, well, if you do a 10-minute walk as the sun's coming up, and you do horizontal eye movement with something that's a panoramic view, then that's going to decrease your anxiety. And one of the studies is EDRM, which is like a...
Yeah, EDM's going to stress me the fuck out all day, every which way.
And they did this with PTSD clients where they notice as soon as they do horizontal eye movement, their anxiety and their stress levels go down. And it's just that simple, right? So anytime you're stressed out, if you can go outside and have this panoramic view, and then you just have your eyes going back and forth horizontally, then that's going to increase your ability to have parasympathetic tone. Where if you think about it, right, like what do we normally do all day in tunnel vision, right? We're on the phone. We have this one like eyesight when it's just completely convoluted, right, into one little thing. So we never have this broad open view of what we should be doing, which is something that's like evolutionary for us, right? You can't be too locked in one thing because then you're going to get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger behind you, right? It's like you got to be able to see everything, and this panoramic view is going to decrease your ability to stress because you're going to feel like you're controlling stuff where, you know, like you say you're in an argument with someone, right? You're just solely focused on that person and being in that argument. But if you just take a step back and you just look past them, then you're going to be in more control of your emotions. It's kind of like the idea of detaching from your emotions when you're emotionally aroused. Like we used to do that in the military all the time. Like if you have to make a call, you have to be able to detach. If you're in a firefight, you have to detach from what's going on so that you can see your surroundings. And in order to do that, you have to pull back and you have to look at everything. And then that's going to allow you to not be stressed. That's going to allow you to not have that anxiety. So those are like 2 to 3 basic things that people can do to start putting themselves in a less stressful environment. Plus, if you're up when the sun comes up and then you go for a walk when the sun goes down, right, then you're producing all the things that your body's naturally supposed to produce. Melatonin's going to be produced better. Dopamine's going to be produced better. Everything's going to be more synergistic with the circadian rhythms within your body as well.
Do you look much at like the role that neurotransmitters play in this? Because
Yeah.
like, I see behavior that like dopamine-driven behavior or like serotonin-driven behavior as far as like, you know, people don't sleep and then they eat. It's like, well, you're probably trying to just replace that neurotransmitter. How do you look at it from like maybe, we talked a little bit maybe more like metabolic as far as, carbs, protein, fat, maybe more like physiological as far as like stress and stress adaptations and cortisol. But how do you look at it from like maybe a neurotransmitter perspective, if that crosses your radar, as well as like dopamine versus acetylcholine versus serotonin, and like how people drive decisions based off? Like I know Poliquin worked on this later in his life, and Thibodeau. I think you may have even done that.
Yeah, I took all
neurotyping stuff. And like, what's the validity? Because I know friends at the end of the day, and we were in Miami last week, and it's just like, by the time the night's over, some of our friends are fucking barbecuing, like, dude, right?
Yeah.
But it's like that we know what dope does. They call it dope for a reason. Like, how do you start to examine people's behaviors on that side of things that maybe inoculate stress with alcohol or with with marijuana or with other drugs?
Yeah, so it's these idea of like coping mechanisms that will give them the thing that they're looking for. So a lot of times when people are highly stressed, they'll look for higher fat, higher carbohydrate foods because that's going to increase your serotonin. So that's going to calm you down a little bit more, right? And then you have people that are constantly trying to find that dopamine drip, which is why we're so addicted to things like social media and all this other stuff where we're looking for likes, continued support of what we're doing. So it's the same thing. If you have someone that has an idea and you find people that believe in your idea and they keep reinforcing that your idea is a good idea, well, then you start to release dopamine because of those affirmations. So if you're on a diet and you're around people that tell you, oh, carnivore is the best diet and that's the diet you're doing, it may not be the best for you, but you're going to continue to have this chase of dopamine because everyone's reaffirming those ideas. So if you're headed in the wrong direction and you have those affirmations, then that's going to cause you to continue to chase them and chase that dopamine. The best way to control a lot of that stuff is just by allowing your body to be on the circadian rhythm that it's supposed to be, because that's going to control a lot of those hormones, those catecholamines in your body, because dopamine breaks down to epinephrine and norepinephrine, and then that's going to allow you to have those, that's going to connect to the beta adrenergic receptors and the alpha adrenergic receptors, which helps you break down fat or it can inhibit fat, right? And those are the things that you have to be able to control at certain times. You exercise, dopamine releases, dopamine allows norepinephrine to release, norepinephrine connects to beta adrenergic receptors, beta adrenergic receptors helps you oxidize or break down fat lipolysis, right? So then you're going to be able to lose fat. You're going to be able. So there's a lot of benefits to it. But if you're always highly aroused and always have those high dopamine, then you're going to have a hard time sleeping. If you can't sleep, then you're not going to be able to release cortisol the way you want to. So then you're going to be in a high cortisol state, right? So it's just trying to constantly not chase those things, to not have dopamine or affirmations control your decision making, right? And if you have it from a more analytical perspective, then you're not going to necessarily be looking at those things, right? So if you have the idea that science and research is going to back some of your stuff up, then you may not be chasing after the dopamine hit of like, I want to be part of this group or that group with my diet. It's like, well, this is what the research kind of shows, and then I can hook my trailer to that, and then I don't have to be so aroused by other stuff to drive my idea making.
You don't need to go to Austin and go to Paleo Effect.
Yeah.
Sing Kumbaya and fucking put coffee
Eat
up
fucking
up
big
your ass.
chunks of keto chocolate or
I don't
whatever
care
it is.
how much tahini you put in it. It does not taste like fucking chocolate. God.
I think like one thing I've done on the neurotransmitter side, like I took all Thibodeau stuff. It's something I was always interested in. It ties into the way like I structure my training with like skill acquisition, adaptive decay, trying to control stressors in training. And the thing I found with neurotyping, and the thing I found with like even like I don't do a ton of nutrition with clients, but the nutrition that I do, it's understanding those people that are either like, there's like, I would just make it super simple. Like there's the A types and there's the B types.
Yeah.
There's like the go-getters and then there's Homer Simpson. And some clients are Homer Simpson, right? And it's like, for me, I could lay on a foam roller for 9 hours. It's not going to do anything for me, but make me frustrated. Like if I have to stretch or do mobility or anything, I just get immediately frustrated that that's what's 5 minutes of my time.
Yeah.
I would rather go hang from a pull-up bar or do a heavy lat pull-down or, do chest-supported row if that's going to be what it does. So for me, it's like I know I'm an A-type personality. It's like if something's not directly monetized in some framework of progression, like I'm not going to do it.
Right.
There's other people, though. Like I know guys who can't get under the bar unless they roll around for 45 minutes. But that's the B-type personality guy. Because outside the gym, he's also not driving the R8 and working on Wall Street.
Right.
You know what I mean? Maybe he's like an analytical guy at a computer, plays whatever they play on the internet. stays up till 1 a.m. and then he loves to roll around in the foam roller. But it's like, I know for these two people, like they need that moment to do that thing. So I'll just back end or front end my training to give them that release. It's like, if I got a client like me, we're not going to roll around and do couch stretch. It's like you're going to do a bunch of front foot elevated split squat or rear foot elevated split squat. Then you're going to go low bar squat. You want to roll around the foam roller? Roll around the foam roller. Like I just will replace it with something else. And I found if you can make those assessments in training and then you can start to look at someone's, diet or sleep or stress, it's like, maybe I can give them what they want over here, and maybe it's going to pull that away from what else they do, right? It's like, if I can drive that dopamine release or this need for like risk versus reward, like I'm not going to then go find it in food. It's like we've satiated it to some degree. Or I worked with a lot of guys and consulted with like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I was getting guys prior to their workout, like, everybody just does the same warm-up thing. And I was like, seems like a really cognitive, really, present, conscious sport to be in. So with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like we were doing like Sudoku, Rubik's Cubes, like light testing and all this kind of cognitive behavior stuff prior to training. It was like, you're not going to roll around on the ground. Like your sport is rolling around on the ground. Like what are you doing with the foam roller right now? You know what I mean? Like wake up.
Just put the foam roller in an arm bar.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, just get it in an arm bar. I've seen that with like kettlebells. Like why are you fucking grappling a kettlebell?
Yeah, but it's like
just stop with this nonsense.
And we see that like with combat sports, and like when I was doing consulting with combat sports, it's like I need this guy to be able to take in like visio-motor feedback or like visio-motor learning, and I need him to be able to pick up like these peripheral signals, like the looking left and right, and then identify like a sensory motor output to that visio-motor feedback, right? It's like if this guy's eyes are here, his hand's down here, I do this next. So with those guys, it was like, I got to give them what they need, and that's like the Rubik's Cube, the Sudoku, the light test, some other cognitive behavior thing. It's not going to be rolling around with foam roller. Like, why do I want this guy to get more relaxed before he gets choked out?
Right.
I want to stimulate him. I want excitement out of this guy before people choke him.
And you know what? That's the thing. It's like I feel like there's an inner and outer valence of driving these feedback loops. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like for me, and I know this, man. Like I've had terrible sleep. It's better now than it used to be. It's still not great, but back in my let's call it my heyday, I'd be on 3-4 hours a night for years. And I now recognize that when I wake up and it's like, this morning, this fucking guy's eating French toast. And I'm like, yes. Yeah. Yes. I was like, no, dude, it's because you haven't slept in a week and a half. Right. So I know the inner valence, the feedback loop that I need to trigger. And I know it's outer valence, evil twin. Like, so when I'm like carbs heavy in the morning, like, yeah, dude, just smash it. It's like, you fucking tired motherfucker. Like, go to sleep.
Yeah.
That's the real adaptation that I'm after. Like with what you're saying with like, hey, like you're about to go super parasympathetic. You watch like Russian wrestlers before a meet or before a competition, like the breathing drills they do to amp themselves up. That's the inner valence where like, the American guys in the back just trying to like get in some caffeine or some stimulants. Like, dude, that's outer valence. That's the evil twin of like the evolved adaptation. Like we never had, French toast. It looked fucking phenomenal, by the way.
It's great.
We never had French toast doused in maple syrup. We never had, hey, let's have a bang energy and go like fucking see sounds or hear colors. We had like these very cerebral inner valence mechanisms to drive some of these neurotransmissions that we needed in the time that we needed them, right? And I think one of the biggest things, and this is kind of my next question, and please by all means run with whatever you're going to say after this.
Nonsense.
Is 100%. That's this podcast. But like one of the things that, because I've had nutrition coaches in the past, and so not something I do great with. But I've started to recognize the trends and the evil twins from the inner to outer valence of my behaviors. Like this outer valence behavior is a reflection of a need of an inner, whether it's breathing, whether it's like, oh fuck, that can just dropped. I need to like go cold shower later, right? Like, or, I want pancakes for breakfast. Right. I need to just go back to sleep. And I'm done. Like, oh fuck, I want to eat this. It's like, no, all right, I'm going to take 45 minutes, have a protein shake and go train, right? Because I think the scariest thing with people starting a nutritional intervention is not knowing where it ends, right? Like what's the Kierkegaard quote about freedom and anxiety or whatever?
Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom.
Right. And like the well, like if I'm falling in a hole.
Kierkegaard explains that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. The metaphor he uses, if you were to look into a deep hole and not see the bottom, the feeling you get in your stomach is anxiety.
Right.
Right. It's like if you stood on the 60th floor of a building, like if you go to John Hancock in Chicago and the window leans out, the feeling you feel is anxiety. It's not fear of falling. It's not knowing where the ground is. So I think, and that's very much true with dieting. Like I was talking to like Ben earlier today, and I was saying like we were talking about this exact quote and the idea. If you go to a restaurant and they have vanilla and chocolate ice cream, I don't like vanilla. I'll get chocolate. It's not that I love chocolate more than caramel.
Right.
I have vanilla or chocolate. You go to a restaurant, they have 19 options. It's like, well, maybe I want steak, but maybe I want chicken. But maybe can I get half of it? No, there's no half measures in anything. That just creates too many questions, right? And that's the idea behind like even how I eat. Like, dude, I have the worst eating habits, and I love eating terrible shit. But I know why I love to eat it, because I've associated it with a behavior in which I got a positive feedback loop from it. I eat French toast, I train, I feel great.
Right.
There's no science behind that. It's just I know. Like I have to eat 20 minutes before I train. I have to eat 10 minutes after I start training because I feel my blood sugar is just crazy. But it's like I've also just associated this maximum amount of food within 30 minutes of training with a good training session.
Right.
So around that stupid behavior I do, I try and eat the most controlled, measured diet. I eat the same oatmeal with the same cinnamon, with the same white rice, with the same chicken, with the same spiralized vegetables at dinner, with the steak. And it's like I've just created like these controls to the poor behaviors I know I have. So it's like the greater the commonality, the less the more the aberrance becomes apparent, which I could pull back on, or the less damage that would do.
But I think like piggybacking off that, anxiety is the dizziness of freedom quote.
Yeah.
Is like when you start with someone, I think one of the issues, and I think it might be very similar to actually like weight training now that I think about it, but with dieting is like, yeah, you're looking into this hole, you're looking at this smorgasbord of ice cream flavors, and you're like, well, I have so many options.
Right.
And I think that becomes the appealing part of these diet identities, your paleo, your carnivore, your keto, your no carb, your slow carb, is that it's like there's a confinement, there's a clear circumscription of the outer borders of this thought process. I know where the bottom is, and it minimizes some of the anxiety, but like because it's hard to sell logical thinking.
Right.
Trust me, as 3 guys on the internet that sell logic and reason. With nutrition, with the inundation of everything, how is it that long term you start to strategize for people to, like I did it just because I've been fucking, obsessive about this shit since I was like 15, and I've stumbled on it based out of necessity. But for someone who's like, I want to lose some weight, I wanted a guy to, Tony's really smart. I listened to this podcast he did with these 2 dumb guys, sounded even smarter. And it's like, how do you start to baton pass the responsibility on to someone to be like, look, like you no longer need to be anxious about this? Because like we get questions around training. Hey, did this look like an RPE 6? Jesus, don't fucking talk to me. This guy, he was 20 minutes yesterday morning, and I just let him blow out the lines. Yeah. I didn't say a word. We just drove, and he just went, and I was like, you good? And he did the little sigh thing. Yeah. Like, I needed that. Thank you. But, I feel like, people can have an emotional attachment to training, but they're more emotionally attached to like the outcome, right? Like, did I get stronger? Did I get leaner? Did I get bigger? Did I get stronger? Whatever, faster. But with dieting and the way it like and food, the way it plays with our like neuroendocrinology and like plays with these things that like, oh, like you want the French toast. It's like, no, you're tired. Right? It has this evil twin. The emotional attachment that people have to food is insane. To me, it's like, I'll be like, hey, back squat, front squat, hack squat. I was like, yeah, sweet, whatever. But if it was just like, I had a client that had to eat 2 apples a day.
Right.
And I was like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, what do you mean you have to eat 2 apples a day? That was like hardwired into the contract. I'm like, are you out of your ever-loving mind? Who gives a shit? What are you, Snow fucking White? What are you talking about? But it's like the emotional attachment to that. How do you start to break that emotional attachment, instill logic and reason, minimize the anxiety that comes with, the uncertainty of knowing where the bottom is or where the end is?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm not a huge fan of these diets with like names, because once you do them, then you think, well, this is the only way I can be successful. So this is the only way that I'm going to continue to diet. And then that causes a lot of issues, because it's like, well, this is something I want to do for the rest of my life. So with a lot of people that are looking to find the answer, it's like, well, education is the best way to do it, and to remove some of the things that would be hindrance for their ability to be educated. So a lot of people, if they come to me and they have specific goals and they don't have the education behind like what food is, well, then you pull away the scale so they're not focused on the scale, and then you educate them of like, hey, this is protein. This is why protein is important. This is why you need it. This is a carbohydrate. This is why it's important. This is why you need it. And then same thing with the fat. And then you start to teach them like, as long as you combine those together, right? It doesn't matter what the food is. You want to eat it. You want to feel good about it. But then you have to disconnect from this idea of like, most people don't have their hunger signals on point with like if they're actually hungry, because we've always been told, we have to eat X amount of meals per day and you have to finish what's on your plate. So the idea of actually being hungry is something that we don't really think about. It's uncomfortable. We don't put ourselves in those situations, so we don't really know where our hunger is at. So being able to teach people how to identify, are they bored or are they actually hungry when they're eating, is something that's really important when it comes to the psychological side of food adherence and stuff like that. So I tend to have people who have issues with that. I'll ask them, ask yourself these couple questions, like, am I actually hungry, or do I just want to eat this? Am I bored? Or do I crave this, or is it just there so I'm going to eat it? Is this something that's actually going to help me perform better? Is this going to help me reach my goals? Or am I just trying to crave something and eat it right now in this one instance? And if they continue to ask those questions, they build awareness around if they're really hungry, or if they're just chasing that dopamine, or if they're just doing something outside of the scope of their goals. Then that awareness is going to allow them to make better decisions. Right? A lot of times we're not really aware of the food we're eating or how we're eating it, right? Are we chewing the food? All this process that we don't really think about anymore because it's become automatic is something that you want to create awareness from. So that way they understand the things that they're doing and why they're doing them. And if they can answer those questions, then they're going to have control over their food. And then they're going to realize, well, food is just food. If I want to have a chocolate bar because I'm actually hungry and I want a chocolate bar, well, then I can have that, and it's not going to ruin my entire day because I understand what food is and what food does, right? And it's kind of, that'll allow them to eliminate that all or nothing mentality that a lot of people have when it comes to dieting. It's like awareness, right? Self-awareness of why you're doing those things. And then you're going to build your hunger signals. Then you're going to build all these things that's actually going to be more appropriate for your decision making than it is to just have this idea of I'm bored. I'm watching football, so I have to eat pizza right now, or chicken wings. It's like football games on. It's like, well, no, you don't have to do any of that stuff. Ask yourself those questions and then have a deeper understanding of that. And I think by teaching people how to count macros, how to track food, and how to do all those things, it gives people the power to understand that food's just food. It's fuel for your body, and you can make anything match, and you don't have to deprive yourself of anything. Then it's going to be creating this there's no deprivation, so there's no tunnel that I have to go down because I can have whatever I want. There's just sometimes I'm going to be in a calorie deficit, and there's sometimes I'm going to be in a surplus or a maintenance, right?
No, I just think I think back to cutting a ton of weight for powerlifting, and I had cut from 178 to 146, and I remember 2-3 days out from a meet, you'd think, and I know both of you guys know this, well, maybe not this guy. You definitely know. But it's man, you'd think about so many foods, if I could only have that right now, right? If I only had that burger, if I only had that Kit Kat. What have you
Dude, I've cut. Are you serious, bro?
Yeah, he's cut a lot of
Dude, I did
before.
2 35-pound cuts in a month. I did
a 4-hour weigh-in, right?
I did a 2-hour weigh-in in Australia, and I got down from 265 to 110 kilo. And then when I met this guy, I turned around 3 weeks later and did the U.S. Open after I was fucking shot up to 270 again. I've been to hell and back, man. Dude, I've lived in saunas. I brought the spin bike in. I've spit in the cup. I've done everything, man. Fuck you.
When have you been 146? When you're 9?
Yeah.
200 plus is comfortable. I don't care what the cut
is.
Oh,
my God. Get out of town, this guy. Unbelievable. Do they have, is that even a powerlifting men's weight class?
No, man.
All right. No, but continue. I'm interested in this.
No, but it's you'd always crave things. You'd crave a burger. You'd crave a chocolate ice cream. Fucking, dude, icebreaker mints. It's if I could just sucking the goddamn mint looks so good, but it's but it's the scarcity of it. It doesn't exist for you, therefore you can't have it. But then now, when I don't cut anymore for anything, I crave junk food far less. I'll be I don't want any ice cream. That sounds, I'm gonna feel like shit if I have that ice cream. There's no scarcity because I could eat ice cream every day for the rest of my life. I'm I don't want it today. When I really want it, it'll be great, but I don't want it now. And that's the kind of thing where you're saying with people that trap themselves in no carb or low fat or whatever these crazy things are, carnivore. It's just the idea that that chocolate bar's on the other side of this doorway that I have to then unlock. And it's almost if I go through the door and have the chocolate bar, all the carnivore people are in the other room and they're going to look through the window at me oh, fuck you, stay over there.
Right.
And it's just a weird mentality to have when you said it's just food. And at the end of the day, it's like stress. Food and stress are very similar in the fact that 48 hours later, it could have been a 1-rep max back squat, or it could have been a guy who cut you off.
Yeah.
Just stress, man. You can't remember what fucking ruined Tuesday. I don't even know what day it is today. It's it could have been a chocolate bar. It could have been 3 cups of white rice. You got the same shit out of it. You don't remember what it was, but something made you kind of bloated. So I think it's that freedom to, like you said, if you give people the knowledge and they can associate the knowledge with the actual action which they're partaking in. It's like, then after a while then becomes autonomous, because it's like, oh, I just go back and forth on this pendulum of, again, the freedom to choose what makes sense in this application.
Like that was like me with alcohol. Dude, 18 years old, it's off my head 4 nights a week. Like, smash. Like, puke and rally like you would not believe. Like, noon on a Friday, I'd already be throwing up, and I would be going strong until noon the next day. Second, it was 19. It's like I could walk into the beer store, and I didn't need to use Justin Scott's ID. Looked nothing like me. I haven't drank in 12 years or 11 years or whatever it's been. I was like, oh, this isn't fun anymore because I can just walk in. I don't have, like, the thrill of, like, remembering this guy's birthday and pretending like my hair is brown. Like, I just had nothing. This was dumb. I was like, oh, I can get a lot done on Sundays when I'm not fucking hungover after a 4-day bender.
Yeah. Yeah, and like Killian talked about too earlier, it's like you have to meet people where they're at as well, right? You're going to have some people that are at this place where they're afraid of carbohydrates. So do you automatically throw out carbohydrates into their diet? No, because then if they do anything, if they feel any type of way, they're going to immediately blame it on the carbohydrates. So you have to meet them where they're at and then allow them to slowly understand where you're bringing them, right? So they're not scared of it. And then you can introduce those things like, oh, well, I'm not used to having carbs. Okay, well, let's just put carbs post-workout because the research shows that, you know, you need carbohydrates post-workout to elicit a better recovery, right? You want to recover better so you can perform better the next day, right? And like, yeah, of course I do. Well, then let's try this and see how that works, right? And then you continue to bring those things in that's backed by the literature one by one, right? And you always, it's like a salesman, right? You always ask them leading questions where they're going to be like, yeah, it's like, oh, you want this free, you know, ride, right? You're like, oh yeah, I want something for free. It's like, okay, well, you want to perform better. You're like, yeah, I want to perform better. Oh, carbohydrates make me perform better. Oh, sweet. So carbohydrates aren't the enemy anymore, right? And then you continue to like give them all these things. And then what happens is now they have all this knowledge. Then they're inundated with like you said, 19 flavors. It's like, how do I pick the right one? Everything has to be optimal. So then it's like a continuing education of like, well, not everything has to be optimal. We can make results with less optimal. You know, you can go out and eat and be like, you know, you've been around enough people where it's like you go out to eat and that person's like off the rails, appetizer.
Andy Wong.
Yeah, appetizer, this, that, the other thing, because it's like, well, fuck it, I'll just start again tomorrow. It's like, well, you should be able to, you should build enough good habits and understand how the body works, right? And those habits are going to lend you to pick the right choices, right? So if I say, hey, go out and have a free meal, it's like, okay, I'm going to have, you know, I'll probably have a steak because that sounds good, and sweet potato. It's like, don't you always eat that? I'm like, well, yeah, that's what sounded good. Like, I don't have to go and eat, you know, you go to Dat's out here in Tampa, they got a fucking burger with a donut on it. It's like, that sounds amazing, right?
Well, it's, man, you bring up such a good point because I always talk about the sliding scale of adaptation to optimization, but it's like you kind of entered in a new thing into the realm, and it's weird because I've talked about it all the time, but just the way you put it together, you went through physiological and psychological inoculation, and then you move to adaptation, then you move to optimization. But being able to be on that spectrum, I feel like a lot of people don't know how to enter this game because they don't know how to inoculate the fear that comes with like not knowing. So the physiological and the psychological inoculation seem to be the first step.
Has to be, right? Because it's like any, you know, you don't take someone who believes in Christianity and tell them, oh, Buddhism's the way to go, right? You have to like, oh, well, you know, check out this, you know, quote. What do you think about this quote? Oh, this quote sounds good. It's like, oh, this is a Buddhist quote. Oh, what is this Buddhism stuff? And then they're like, oh, well, this might be a good quick read for you to look into. And like they read it and look into it, like, oh, this is really cool stuff. Then, you know, you kind of slowly bring that person into having an open mind, being a creative thinker. And it's the same thing with food, right? Like, you know, you have someone who listens to Mark Bell and they're just, carbs are bad, right? War on carbs. There's no way I can be a high performance power lifter without, you know, if I'm eating carbohydrates, I'm just gonna be fat. It's like, well, maybe, right? But I'm not gonna, if I go to you and be like, you're an idiot, right? Carbohydrates are your most readily available fuel source. It's gonna fuel you for performance, especially in an anaerobic capacity. They're gonna be like, well, no, Mark Bell said it this way, so I have to listen. It's like, okay, well, you know, let's figure out a way to slowly venture into doing other things so that you understand that this is not a one-way, it's not a one-trick pony, right? You can do so many things to get the results you want.
Well, the inoculation process for nutrition on like the internet is basically the Jehovah's Witness sales pitch. Hey, get the fuck off my lawn. Get the fuck out of here. We're going to get you I got dogs and a hose. Like, but there's people just show up and they start voicing their opinion, and it's devoid of context. It's devoid of any critical thinking, like you said. Yeah, dude, hey, before we close it off, I just want to give people a chance to like find you and what you guys are doing. Because here's the thing, we need an extra 5 minutes for you because you do so much. Like whenever I think I'm doing a lot, I just think like, well, like Tony's started 3 businesses in the last hour. So like, I mean, from everything from Subject Zero to the upcoming stuff on the education side to Phoenix to the strength to just you personally and your pursuit and your PhD. Just we are so inadequate. But for those listening,
I think of that too, right? Like I think of, the people that are really successful and, how they become successful and how they handle so many things. It's like, well, I'm not really doing much compared to them. So there's more I can do. I don't think of it as like, I'm not good enough because I'm not doing as much as them. It just tells me like, well, they're the same person as me. So if they're doing all this, I can find more stuff to do.
Dude, you're like the Elon Musk of fitness. Like you just in your free time, you're just moved to Tampa and do a PhD. Like get the fuck out of here. It's like, oh yeah, I do a boring company too, where I dig holes and put people in like the center of the earth. But no, like Instagram, Facebook, social, podcast, Coach's Corner, all that stuff.
All that stuff. So yeah, we have Subject Zero supplements, evidence-based supplement company. We have 3 new products coming out here soon, but we also have stim-free nootropic, sleep aid, Equilibrium, which is an all-around health supplement, intra-workout, pre-workout, stim-free, and then a hydration formula. So those are the 6 that we have. And then you can go to subjectzerosups.com to check that out. And then also teamphoenixperformance.com is where we have our coaching services, nutrition, and strength training. And then we also have our seminars that myself and Trevor Jaffe are doing. We have 2 booked out for next year. One's in Dallas, Texas, and another one is in Nashville, Tennessee. Yes.